I would now like to invite Wan Saiful Wanjan, Chief Executive of Ideas, to accompany his fellow panelists on stage as they take their places. A warm welcome to our esteemed guest panelists today, Datuk Nur Jazlan Mohamad, Member of Parliament for Pulai, Dr. Sufian Jusoh, Associate Professor at University Kebangsaan Malaysia, and Datuk Nur Farida Arifin, former Malaysian Ambassador to the Netherlands. I now hand this time over to Wan Saiful as he moderates for this session.
This is the time when I will try my best to get our panelists into trouble with the authorities in Malaysia, and while at the same time steering very well clear of creating trouble for myself. That was a very enlightening presentation just now, and I think many of you, if you have been to our events before, you might be thinking, why in the world are we suddenly talking about all these serious topics, so early on the Saturday morning? I'm wondering. Yeah, Datuk Farida is wondering as well. Most of our events, in fact, all of our events previously have almost always touched on just Malaysian politics. We focused on that with not so much emphasis. A little bit, we did touch a little bit on the economy, but not as deep as it is today. But the reason is we are really trying to push ideas to become, policy-oriented and not so much known as a popular organization. We really want to build a reputation as an organization that is focused on policy matters. And if you look at what's happening in Malaysia today, I think towards the end of your presentation just now, you touch on the key issues that we really need to address if we want to move forward. And these are actually the issues affecting the country today. Whether or not we should reform the structure of our society, you might have been commenting, you might have commented on it from the economic point of view, but as soon as you touch on the NEP, you touch on the preferential policies, the protectionist policies, it is not just the economy, it is politics, and it's social politics as well. In fact, the issues that you touched just now, as you rightly pointed out, Razin, the hurdles are not really on making the economic argument. The hurdles are actually making the political argument for them. I think that's a big challenge. And you see today, if we don't steer the path well enough, my fear is it will translate into an even worse ethnic relations situation in Malaysia. If we don't handle the distribution of the economic cake well enough, then there will be impacts on national unity. So that's just to start the conversation. I want to start, the way we're going to do this is just like the years before, where we have about maybe less than an hour, about 45 to 50 minutes. What we're going to do is we start with some question and answers. I will pose some questions, and then we open to the floor for discussion. I'm going to start with a very easy question, just to warm up the situation. Maybe I'll start with Datuk Nur Jazlan. But before that, let me just reintroduce everybody again. Datuk Nur Jazlan sits on our council. He is chairman of the Public Accounts Committee, a member of Parliament from UMNO. So emphasis on from UMNO. And Dr. Sufian, well, we got to know you from the several different meetings that we've had at the Ministry of International Trade and Industry. Funny enough, the way he was introduced to me first was, this is one of the very few supporters of free market economy in Malaysia. And he is specialized on international trade, and you will see from his comments just now that he is one of the very rare breed in Malaysia as well, who is very supportive of further liberalizing the economy. And Datuk Nur Farida, yeah, the troublemaker today. So if you're familiar with the G25, the group of 25 eminent persons in Malaysia who has been who made one statement and one open letter and ruffle all the feathers that she can ruffle. So this is her. So I'm going to distance myself just a little bit. No, not really. So we're going to start with some focus on the economy, then we're going to widen up to the wider political context as well. So just to warm up the situation, a very easy question to Datuk Nur Jazlan first. How is UMNO doing today?
Still good at the moment. We're still in power. But I've always been somebody who is not liked in UMNO. The only election I ever lost is for the National Council of UMNO last year. I offered myself and I lost because I agree with what Professor Sally has said, 99%. This is the problem with Malaysia. When it comes to liberalization, the issue of the Bumiputra policy and how the Malays are being protected will come to the forefront. And there is less political will to change the situation. And I don't know how long this will last, because the public, is getting more aware of major issues, critical issues, and Ideas has been performing a good job in highlighting these issues. So I think it's a matter of time. But I hope to be inside UMNO and also to be talking about issues and trying to find like-minded friends, which are not many, I can say. So for the moment, we are good. Another few elections, I don't know. Thank you.
So for the moment, we are good. Okay. Yes, but I can see the politician in you still.
I'm still part of the government.
Yeah.
I still have to give the government's point of view, whether the audience likes it or not.
Yes. Okay, good. Dr. Sufyan, do you think we're moving on the right trajectory?
Sorry, I don't understand your question. I remember in the Mind Your Language, when I was small, the Ali Nadim said, I don't understand your question. So what do you mean by trajectory?
So but Dr. Sally was saying that we need to do certain things. We see the government announcing, or the government did announce that they want to reform the economy and political structure as well. So, a few years down the line, after those major announcements have been made, you as an economist looking from the outside, not part of the government, do you think we have implemented those reforms? Do you think we're still committed to those reforms?
Okay, I have the advantage or disadvantage of working in all 10 ASEAN member states, plus being based in 2 different universities, one in Switzerland, probably one of the most liberalized economy in the world, and another at UKM, where I really have to watch my academic freedom here, and then being a World Bank consultant in the countries that we used to be in the 70s. I'm serving in Myanmar, Micronesia, Kiribati, Timor-Leste, and all those kind of stuff. So I have only one word to answer your question: ikhlas. Whether they are doing it with the ikhlasan or not.
Ikhlas is sincerity.
So that is the main issue that we are facing at the moment. On paper, we have very good policies, the very good transformation plan, but when it comes to, I have the probably the biggest experience, the worst experience in defending the TPPA. I was the face of the TPPA in the first dialogue at Madrid. I was thrown to the wolf by a MITI. And I think at that point of time, I was very optimistic about the PPA and the government movement into further liberalization. But at this stage, as of today, I'm not sure whether the keikhlasan is there. So that answers all. Thank you.
That's really interesting. Before I come to you, Dr. Farida, maybe I go to Razin first. Dr. Sufyan was saying that the government needs a sincerity if they want to actually proceed. But he mentioned that he was the face of those who were campaigning for the TPPA, and you were thrown to the wolves. And I think that is quite a good way of explaining it, because the lay public out there is quite against liberalization, especially the TPPA, and the campaign against something like TPPA is quite loud in the wider context. So why is it so difficult for people to argue for liberalization?
Well, I think it's partly, perhaps largely, the government's fault. about 10 years ago, I spent quite a bit of time in Bangkok looking at the Thai-US FTA negotiation when Mr. Thaksin was still in power, before he was booted out by the army and the palace. And there are perhaps some parallels. Thaksin was very much an authoritarian figure. He thought that he could just do these deals with the Americans. He didn't realize what he was getting into. And he didn't consult the Thai people. And those were pretty much the instructions he gave government. Now, this, of course, is a very different animal to other FTA negotiations because it's led by the Americans. The Americans have a standard template for this. It goes all the way back to the NAFTA agreement, the free trade agreement between the United States, Canada, and Mexico back in the early 90s. And that was used for the US-Singapore FTA and for the other FTAs that the United States has in this part of the world with South Korea and Australia. And that's what they applied to the US-Malaysia FTA and what they have for the TPP. It really does require quite significant changes on the ground at home, and that's of course where the politics comes into play, which it doesn't with the other FTAs. Because as I said, they're largely paper tigers. And then suddenly you see this outpouring of civil society activism, which is mostly on the anti-market side. And then the government doesn't know how to handle it. The other issue here is, of course, the question, who is the government? Right? So there are, of course, different parts of government doing different things with, of course, to use another metaphor, the left hand not knowing what the right hand is doing, or many different hands, as if in the swirling hands of a Hindu god, not knowing what other hands are doing. But at the core of it, I think, is very much the dilemma that you pointed out. You have a prime minister who announces the need for further liberalization. He seems to get it in quotation marks. But at the same time, a prime minister facing internal battles in his own party, and with a party that sends a very different message, perhaps not to all Malaysians, but to some Malaysians. And so either one ends up being very confused as a member of the public, or one ends up on the other anti-market, anti-liberalization side. That's why I said that perhaps a lot of this stems from the government itself.
Yeah. So in that sense, I thought, Farida, do you think we have more microphones as well? We seem to like sharing here. In that sense, Farida, do you think the government actually has what it takes in order to take the country a step forward, not just economically? Let's widen this perspective as well. Maybe you want to explain a little bit what is the content of the open letter that the group of 25 actually wrote, and do you think the government is still in the position to respond effectively to your demands?
Well, first of all, the government needs to walk the talk. What we're basically asking for, we were just a group of concerned citizens made up of Malay professionals, Malay Muslim professionals, and we were very concerned about what is happening to this country, in the sense that the rise of extremist groups, the rise of supremacist groups, racist groups, and the kind of vitriolic rhetoric that they were responsible for, race baiting, raising the temperature, and making a lot of people, the communities in the country, very, very fearful and insecure. And of course, this has a bearing as well on the economy, because you can hear that there is capital flight. People who have sent their children abroad, the children don't want to come back because of concern of what's happening in the country. And people, stashing their cash outside the country, that kind of thing. And if this is not checked, the situation we feared would be getting worse. Besides the extremist rhetoric, There's also the what I would call the executive exuberance on the part of the religious authorities. I think you yourself have experienced it personally. There's been trespass on the civil law by the Sharia authorities when the Constitution has very clearly provided that the Constitution is the supreme law of the country, and that limits are placed in our Constitution on Sharia law, on the enactment of laws by states, by state assemblies, which will include Sharia law. Then you have this talk of imposition of hudud. In fact, people may not realize it, but in 1993, the Kelantan State Assembly has actually passed the hudud law. The problem is they are not able to enforce it because the Constitution prevents them. And also we have this act called the Sharia Courts Criminal Offences, Sharia Courts Criminal Act 1965, which places limits on the kind of punishment that state laws are able to impose. This is limited to imposition of 3 years imprisonment, 6 strokes, 6 lashes of the rotan, and a $5,000 fine. So obviously hudud laws, which will include a cutting of hands and feet and using the guillotine and so on, is totally outside, is totally forbidden by this law, plus also the federal constitution. And there have been many incidents, as everyone here is aware, where the cases of body snatching by the religious authorities, where somebody is supposed to, a deceased is supposed to, that is supposed to have converted to Islam prior to his or her death, and then the Islamic authorities, snatches the body for Muslim burial against the will of the will of the family. Then you have the case of a Hindu bride who was arrested on her wedding day because there was this allegation that she's actually a Muslim undergoing a Hindu marriage, those kind of things. And then of course the Khalwat raids and so on. And we're saying that this is not even part of real Islamic law. There's no such thing as Khalwat in Islam, because in Islam Khalwat simply means spiritual retreat. So, and then of course you have the Borders book case, the Borders case. This is, the Borders is of course is a multinational company, and they had stocked this book by Irshad Manji, and the religious authorities, was it Jawi? Yes, the Federal Territory Islamic Department raided the bookstore, arrested the supervisor, she's called Nik Raina, the manager, and a few of the staff, and also charged Borders in court plus the staff. And this has been going on for quite a number of years. So Borders sought judicial review from the civil courts. Jawi lost the case. Again, there was an appeal to the Court of Appeal, and Jawi lost it simply because when they arrested the staff of the Borders bookstore, on the basis that the charge was that they were stocking a banned book. But in actual fact, the book was not banned at the time that the action was taken by Jawi. The book was banned by the Home Affairs Ministry 3 weeks later. So it was not then an offense. And yet the appeal court has already given its decision. And yet we hear that Jawi is appealing against the decision, they're appealing to the federal court. This is not just cruel, but let's not forget that Borders is a multinational company. And if we're going to take this kind of action, showing religious intolerance in this country, you are also going to frighten off the foreign investors. I've already mentioned about capital flight by Malaysians. Are we able to attract foreign investors if we allow this kind of intolerance and negative actions by the religious authorities to take place in this country? But the problem is, this country, everything is permeated by politics. The government inaction, there's no check by the government on all the negative things that's going on in this country, because everything is governed by the fact that they have to win votes. And the unfortunately, the last two elections, the results of the last two elections has made the ruling coalition very insecure because they know that they've been abandoned. Well, they talk about the Chinese tsunami in the last elections, but there's also abandonment of the ruling coalition, particularly UMNO. I think that Nurjazan will agree with me, by the urban Malays. And in fact, the slogan at that time was ABU, anybody but UMNO. So what the government is trying to do now is to focus on the rural Malay heartland, which are the Malays in the peninsula, the Muslim Malays in the peninsula. And they have to do this, they have to compete with PAS, because it's basically PAS constituency. So the only thing is the strategy is to out-Islamicize PAS. So they have to prove to the Malays, in the rural areas, they are more Islamic than PAS. Thus we get, during the time of Dr. Mahathir, he put his foot down. Even when the Hudud law was passed by Kelantan, he put his foot down and said, this is not Islam. We're not having anything to do with it. The time is not ripe to impose hudud. Now we have this very hunky-dory joint committee comprising both PAS and UMNO, looking at the possibility of imposing hudud. Well, as to whether they're going to get the 2/3 majority to change the constitution, of course, it's another matter. Well, I'm a Muslim and a practicing Muslim at that, but I would not want to live under hudud law. Thank you very much. When you look at Saudi Arabia, Pakistan, these not exactly shining examples of states which have imposed hudud law, because there have been a lot of injustices. So these are the concerns which have brought the so-called G25 together. And as Wan Saiful has mentioned, these are made up mainly of, most of us are, we've got 4 or 5 former Secretaries General of very powerful ministries, 2 former Secretaries General of the Finance Ministry, of the Home Ministry, Foreign Ministry, Directors General, and so on. And then also we've got a founding member, a heart surgeon, founding member of IJN. I mean, these are people of stature, and 7 or 8 ambassadors led by our former Secretary General, because we are concerned about what is happening in the country. And we said our main motive is to bring back sanity to the country. And because this has to be stopped, and the government has to show leadership. So one of the proposals in our open letter is that because of the trespass, as I said, by the religious authorities on civil law, we are asking the Prime Minister to show leadership, to set up an expert group comprising Sharia law experts as well as constitutional law experts to review because this is what has been causing the problem: the Sharia criminal enactments, criminal offences enactments, because some of them have encroached onto the jurisdiction of the federal government. Because of course, in our constitution, for those who are not familiar, we have the state list, the federal list. This is the 9th schedule, which contains the federal list. This is a subject matter where the federal government, federal parliament can legislate. Then the list 2 is a state list, subject matters where the states can legislate. Then, of course, we've got the concurrent list. And what the subject matters that states can legislate are very limited. And in fact, all areas of criminal law are basically, except for zina, of course, are basically within the jurisdiction of the federal parliament. So when you pass laws like hudud, it is totally in violation of list 2 of the federal of the 9th schedule of the federal constitution. So what we want to do is for the states and for the government to respect the federal constitution and not to tolerate any violations of the constitution. This is a carefully crafted document, and this is a document which has been negotiated between the races, agreed with our colonial masters, and even as Chandra Muzaffar, one of our leading thinkers, has opined, it says there is this document satisfies all the Islamic tenets. It calls for democracy, it protects minorities, it protects the liberties of the individual, because in the fundamental liberties articles, and it protects it protects people from tyranny by government and so on. So this is not something that we want to lightly throw away or lightly interfere with. And in fact, after our open letter was published, there's another group called the Group of 33, comprising there were two muftis, many professors. I hope you're not one of them. A few lawyers who, at least they were very civilized about it. They agreed with most of what our letter contained. Our only difference is in the approach. They want to dismantle the constitution to make way for Sharia law. They want Sharia law to be the supreme law of the country. So this is where we differ. We say we want to maintain the status quo, but we want to improve. We want to make sure that there's no more trespass or encroachments by the Sharia authorities on the federal constitution. But they want the constitution to be changed to make way for it. But as many people have asked, what Sharia law? There's so many versions of Sharia law. Is it Sharia law of Iran?